Welcome to everybody that is joining us today on our webinar, Psychosocial Risks and Hazards in the Workplace. This will be presented by the lovely Frances Orr, who's our Principal HR Advisor and also our mental health first aid trainer. So this is her area and this is her passionate side of HR that she loves to delve into. So I'm looking forward to hearing it today as well. I would like to welcome everybody that is joining us today, and I particularly like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we work today and pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are with us today. So before we go any further, I will say to everyone that if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A as we go along, because we will be happy to answer them at the end. And as always, we'll be happy to follow up afterwards as well. But we are Strawberry Seed Consulting. This is, we help sorry, I'll start that again. It is late in the year, people. We are a HR consulting firm and we help small businesses all across Australia with their HR. This is our lovely team, though we're, as of today, going to be adding a few more people to that. And so that we're pretty happy about that announcement, because that's been a little while coming. And I think it's really important to note that, you know, when it comes to things like mental health and psychosocial risks, that's something that we're talking to our clients about more and more. And I think it's really important that, you know, we get a chance to talk about this topic in our last free webinar for 2024. So I am going to now hand over to Frances and let her talk about what you're here to listen to.
Magical. Thank you so much, Carly. And again, welcome everyone to our final webinar for 2024. So the key topics we are going to be talking through tonight are what are psychosocial risks and hazards and why do they actually matter? We're going to chat through how to identify and assess these risks in your workplace, practical strategies to mitigate those risks and enhance employee well-being, compliance with your legal obligations, and we'll finish up with chatting through how to work in a mentally healthy way. So what are psychosocial risks and hazards? This might be something that you've heard of. This might be a completely new topic. The definition technically is a work stressor. A psychosocial hazard or work stressor is an occupational hazard related to the way the work is designed, organised and managed, as well as the economic and social context of work. So unlike the other three categories of occupational hazard, which tend to be chemical, biological and physical hazards, psychological hazards don't arise from a physical substance, object or hazardous energy. So psychosocial hazards are factors in the design, organisation and management of the workplace and of the work. And that increases the risk of work-related stress and can lead to psychological or physical harm. So think of it, I suppose it's your mental health hazards, if you like, to make it more simple. So psychological health has always been a feature of the Work Health and Safety Act, but there have recently been new laws implemented to essentially deliver stronger obligations to manage employees' psychosocial safety in the workplace. These codes of practice on managing psychosocial hazards at work is an improved code of the practice under Section 247 of the Work Health Safety Act. So these changes to the Work Health and Safety regulations give more specific details on how to meet your workplace health and safety duties and protect employees from psychosocial hazards and risks. These came into effect on the 1st of April 2023. So if you feel like a bit of bedtime reading, I strongly suggest you pop into the Work Health and Safety Act and check out Section 274. The codes of practice are now in force in all states except Victoria currently. There's no date confirmed as to when they'll be implemented. However, it is absolutely recommended that Victorian businesses be proactive and work to the code as if it is already implemented. So psychosocial hazards can create stress, and stress can cause psychological or physical harm. The stress itself isn't an injury, but if workers are stressed often over long periods of time, or the level of the stress is really high, it can cause harm. So psychological harm may include signs and symptoms or develop into things like anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, sleep disorders, for example. But it also can harbour into physical harm, and that might include things like musculoskeletal injuries, chronic disease, or fatigue-related injuries. So now we know what it is. It's our mental health in the workplace. It's our risks and hazards to our mental health. How do we identify psychosocial risks and hazards? Well, look, of course, you can avoid stress at work by not going to work. And that would be ideal in most people's scenarios. And look, if you won the 20 million last night, or you're in it for the 50 million on Thursday, that might work for you. But it's not going to work for everyone. Unfortunately, most of us do have to go to work. It's important to note, though, that mental ill health is not just caused by workplace factors. There may very well be other contributing factors. People do have lives outside of the workplace, but we know that we do spend an awful lot of time, or a great portion of our lives, in the workplace. So it's best practice to be aware of what things may attribute or exacerbate a condition, especially through psychosocial risks and hazards. So common psychosocial hazards at work are included on this slide and the next slide. In this case and on this slide, we have the presence of or too much of these things listed. So it would be the presence of or too much job demands or role overload, low job demands, remote or isolated work, traumatic events or material exposure at work, role conflict or lack of role clarity, emotional demands, or poor physical environment. So those ones that are all in red there, they're hazards that are based in job characteristics and in job management. The ones in blue here, so conflict, poor workplace relationships and interactions, violence and aggression, harassment, including sexual harassment or racial harassment, and bullying, they are all behaviours that are harmful. So they would be generally considered interactions between other people. So these are the psychosocial hazards that you would have a lot of exposure to or overexposure to in the workplace that can cause harm. On the flip side of that, of course, there could be a lack of or low amounts of job control, support from co-workers or managers or your supervisors. There could be low organisational justice, low support with resources, job security. There could be very poor organisational change management. There might not be much meaning and purpose within the workplace. And there certainly might not be any reward or recognition within your culture. And those hazards, again, are hazards that are based in job characteristics and within management in the workplace. So it's also important to understand that psychosocial hazards may interact and combine, and these might create new, changed, or different or higher risks. Therefore, it's really important for us to consider all the psychosocial hazards workers may be exposed to when managing those risks. So some hazards might not create psychosocial risks on their own, but they may do so if they're combined with other hazards. And then there might be some hazards that only create risks when they're on their own and severe enough. So I'll give you an example. You might have a combined situation where there might be really high workloads or lots of pressure on producing work. So let's say Christmas time for retail staff. But that combined with workers not being able to take a break because there's no one else to backfill the break time. So there's two situations there. The workload is really, really high and workers cannot have access to natural breaks to rest and recover. So those two combined might become a psychosocial risk and hazard. So some examples of psychosocial risks and hazards in the real world, as it were, can come under a few different titles. So we might have high emotional demand. So for example, we do work with a lot of allied health professionals. And they, I mean, and many industries do absolutely have this, but people who work quite closely with patients who might be experiencing physical or mental health challenges, professionals in that area might be managing people's emotions, the patient's emotions, the family's concerns, and it can create quite an emotional strain. And this can lead to things like compassion fatigue or burnout, for example. So having that high emotional demand can be a very common example of a psychosocial risk. Workload pressure. So I'm sure we've all had this at some stage in our careers, you know, staff shortages, high client volumes or interaction, or you've got a lot of administrative demands. So, you know, we all know that when we have periods of high work demand, there's obviously a lot more pressure to work faster, to be productive, and you're potentially extending your hours, which obviously can lead to maybe unreasonable overtime. And of course, that can lead to stress if someone is feeling like they just can never keep up and they can't meet with the expectations. You might have something along the line of interpersonal conflicts. So conflicts can arise with colleagues, managers, supervisors, or even your clients or customers. And this can happen especially when there are misunderstandings or a lack of communication, or even sometimes when there's competing priorities between roles. And of course, those types of conflicts can impact well-being and team dynamics, which could potentially, if it's not addressed, lead to things like harassment and bullying and discrimination in the worst case scenarios. There could be an example where your team is exposed to aggressive or violent behaviours. You know, we've all seen terrible videos probably on our social medias about people who are interacting in an excessively aggressive or violent manner. And of course, that's going to cause fear and stress among people that work here. It was just this morning, I think, that I must have been watching the breakfast news, and there was an article, or there was a section where Bunnings had video recorded its clients, or video recorded its premises essentially, but had captured people being exceptionally violent to their staff members. And it was horrifying, absolutely terrifying. And this is Bunnings. So, you know, those types of behaviours can cause a great deal of stress and anxiety for people that are working in that situation, especially if they then feel inadequately supported. So if they're not then being supported after the fact, that can also lead to a psychosocial hazard. Some further examples might be a lack of autonomy. So professionals who often work within really structured settings, or that might have to follow really established protocols, that can sometimes lead to a bit of frustration or disengagement, especially if they feel that they don't have any control or input over what they are doing. So, you know, if you've got a very process-driven job, you may feel that you have no control over what you're doing, or you don't have any input. There could be elements of role ambiguity and conflict. So when job roles and responsibilities aren't clearly defined, that can often lead to confusion and frustration, especially if people are feeling a bit uncertain about what they should be doing, or people are overlapping in responsibilities. Sometimes you'll get the, I do that, no, I do that, or nobody does it. So that can often cause a lot of confusion. And that would be a good point in terms of what I'll talk about later on. Risk management is everyone has a clear and concise position description. There could be inadequate support for mental health. If there's a lack of access to any support, or if employees even feel discouraged from actually seeking help or from expressing themselves, or sort of admitting or owning that they aren't coping, then they may experience really increased levels of stress and anxiety, because obviously they're harboring all those feelings inside and they can't get any support in the workplace. Job insecurity is another one, and you know, since COVID, people may have experienced this more than any other time. But I mean, again, within allied health, or maybe even the social and disability care industries, there might be changing protocols or healthcare policies that people need to maintain and keep up with, Funding might be an issue at occasions. There might be changes in organizational structures. So employees may even face a lot of uncertainty regarding their role. And again, of course, that is going to lead to stress and anxiety. Exposure to traumatic events, so much the same as people experiencing violence or aggression. You could also be experiencing traumatic events within the workplace. Prime example of that is obviously emergency service workers who may regularly witness traumatic events or be involved in distressing situations. And that may even cause secondary trauma. So if you are a business that maybe does have exposure to traumatic events, obviously that's an area that you might like to focus on when you're conducting your risk assessments. And work-life balance challenges. You know, when we're working in a role, if we've got really long hours or the hours are irregular, you might be on call for certain periods, or you might have really high job demands that make it really difficult to achieve that work-life balance. That can obviously contribute to things like burnout. That may or may not be assisted by the new right to disconnect policies that's been introduced into Fair Work. But obviously people have to be aware of, you know, you need to have a life outside of work. Easier said than done sometimes, I know. So now we have a sort of an idea of what the risks and hazards might be. How do we go about mitigating those? Now, I want you all to think about, you've probably done a risk assessment in your workplace for physical illness and injuries. This is exactly the same. We're not stepping outside and creating any new processes. This is the same process. So during any type of process like this, it's really, really great if you can consult with your employees at every step of the process. We always say this, you know, form a committee. The committee can be 2 or 3 people, but encourage other team members to assist you. This is going to be really, really beneficial in the long run because you'll have different or additional viewpoints, and you'll absolutely get buy-in from the team because they've got a say in what's happening. So you'll see here our little diagram. And as I've said before, this applies to any risk assessment. So step 1 is identifying the hazards. So we're thinking about what potentially could cause harm in the workplace. This can be really, really simple. This can be walking around the business. This can be looking at work patterns. This can be, and this sounds a bit silly, but observing employee interactions. Could even be observing client interactions. It could be checking information that you might have to hand, so reports such as time and attendance records, for example. The second step is you're going to assess those risks. So you're going to write them all down as you're identifying them, and then you're going to go into the second phase of assessing them. So understanding the nature of the harm the hazard could cause, how serious the harm or the potential harm could be, and the likelihood of that incident actually happening. Step 3, you're going to try and control the risks. Now, it's your obligation under health and safety to take all reasonable steps, pretty much. In many states, some vary. But of course, you should try and control as much as possible the risks. So implementing the most effective control measures that are reasonably practical and ensuring that they remain effective over time. So it means that you should eliminate risks if possible to do so. If it's not reasonably practical to eliminate risks, then you're going to implement the most effective control measures. So that will then minimize the risks so far as possible. And then again, you have to make sure that those things are still being effective over time. And then finally, step 4 is reviewing the control measures. So they are being reviewed to make sure that they are working as planned. And sometimes they might not. Sometimes they might change or adjust, and the business needs to make the changes as required in response to those. So I'm going to go through all the steps just a little bit more in detail. So step 1, again, identifying the risks. So recognizing potential psychosocial hazards within the workplace. So again, it can be as simple as doing a walkthrough. it's talking to your team, it's checking data, it's checking reports, it's making sure that you have access to people around you that you can observe. It might even be checking things like illness or injury reports. It might be checking sick leave reports, for example, to see if there's a pattern at certain periods of the year. So we obviously suggest that you document and identify the risks. And we usually would suggest using a form or a document similar to the one on screen now. That's ours, obviously, but it can be in whatever format works for your business. So you can use whatever format, whatever template you desire, or what works for the business. But the key information needs to be on there so that you can say, okay, this is a possible or potential risk within our workplace. And do bear in mind that, like for physical hazards, some workers may actually be at a greater risk from psychosocial hazards. And this can be due to certain barriers of understanding or participating in safety processes. So there might actually be a greater likelihood or severity of harm for those people. So, for example, let me say it could be a greater risk for maybe a person who's limited with experience in the workplace. So that could be a younger person. It could be someone that has returned to work from a long period of absence, for example. It could be someone who has a barrier to understanding safety information. So that could be literacy or language barriers. It could be perceived barriers to raising safety issues. So someone might not want to come forward to say that something might be a risk. Or someone might have had previous exposure to a hazard and maybe doesn't think that it's necessary to report. So when you are doing this risk assessment, try to cast the net wide and think of everything and everyone that could potentially have a risk or a hazard. Step 2, and I love this beautiful little table with all our lovely colours on, assess the risks. So in this one, you'll see down the left there, there's the likelihood of the incident occurring. And across the top there, there's the impact or the severity of the risk occurring. So this assessment obviously helps us prioritise which hazards need really immediate action, and gives you an idea of what the risk levels are involved. You'll see there, the higher the risk equates to the red category. So if there is an issue or a risk or a hazard within your business that has a high likelihood of happening, and has potentially a severe consequence, that is obviously going to need to be your priority. If you have something that's fairly unlikely to happen and actually wouldn't necessarily cause severe harm, then obviously that's a lower priority. It can be as simple as literally color coding your risk assessment. And again, it can be done in any format that the business it encourages or that you work with. So it could be a Google Docs form, it could be an Excel spreadsheet, it could be whatever you need as long as you've got it documented somewhere. So stage 3, once you've identified the risks, you've assessed them for their impact and severity, you then need to review the risks. And again, you're looking at information that you have to hand. You might even like to send out an employee survey, checking in on them. That's great if you can have an anonymous survey. People feel more confident in expressing themselves. You're going to be looking at the work behaviours again, tracking all the information, any reports, looking for trends, etc. Also, during this process, it's good to consider when or why hazards aren't being reported. So employees might not report psychosocial hazards. They might not even report physical hazards because they might just see them as part of the job or it's part of the work culture. They might not believe it's serious enough to report. They may feel that they don't have time to report frequently occurring hazards. They might think that the reports get ignored or not handled respectfully or confidentially. They might fear that they'll be blamed or believe reporting may expose them to additional harm. So things like, discrimination or being disadvantaged. They might not know or understand how to report a hazard. And if that's the case, then that's, again, another area that you can automatically implement. So, it could be any one of those reasons as to why someone's not reporting a hazard. And there's not really an excuse not to report, but, you do have to encourage that from an OH&S standpoint. So just as a quick example, if you've got an employee who's being bullied or harassed, or is being exposed to harmful behaviors in the workplace, they might not report that if the person that's creating those issues isn't a person of authority. So it could be their manager, or it could be a peer worker, but the peer worker, has a lot of clout, I suppose, with the rest of the team. So do think about what the barriers might be for someone to report something. That's an area that you want to make nice and streamlined, nice and easy, and making sure that people are very aware of how that needs to happen. And again, you are likely to have that with physical illness or injuries. You possibly have a form already in place for people to report any sort of hazards. So the final stage is to review the control measures. Have you reviewed the work design? Are jobs designed with balanced workloads, clear PDs or responsibilities? Do they have control of their working hours? Is the business encouraging reasonable work hours and discouraging the old excessive overtime? Are they striking that work-life balance that is desperately needed? Is there clear communication? Is there transparency in things like organizational changes, role expectations? Is there transparency in the feedback process? Are you having regular performance reviews or regular catch-ups? Do you have a supportive leadership team? Have you trained your managers to help identify signs of mental health struggles and to be able to provide support? Role clarity, are the roles clearly defined? Back to the PDs again. Does that include things like the expectations, KPIs, accountabilities, etc., to prevent confusion? And are you promoting a positive workplace culture? Are you doing things like encouraging open communication about mental health? Are you fostering a supportive environment? Do people feel safe expressing concerns? Do they have a pathway to express those concerns? Do you have policies and procedures in place that have clear reporting procedures? Do you provide regular training on things like workplace respect, diversity, inclusion, bullying, harassment, discrimination, etc.? Is there provision for an EAP service or an employee assistance program, which would be able to provide mental health support as and when employees needed it? So reviewing all those things and checking those off will absolutely be imperative if you're looking at psychosocial risks and hazards in your workplace. As a business, a key part of this process and any process is to implement a psychosocial risks and hazards policy. So I'm sure many of your businesses do have policies in certain areas, and it's really, really imperative that this becomes one of those policies. And hopefully then you can then implement that into some form of training with your team. So whether that's discussing it at a toolbox meeting, whether someone like Strawberry Seed comes in and talks to the team, having that on a regular basis, whilst that is not the be all and end all, it's not the set and forget, but it absolutely is a really logical and effective central resource to have within the business, and certainly the first steps in helping guide people through this process of identifying psychosocial risks and hazards. So as employees, as managers, as business owners, it's really prudent to understand how others may communicate their experiences of psychosocial hazards. So I think this comes from WorkSafe, but what it actually might sound like is comments coming from your team. So it might be things like, I feel stressed. I can't sleep. I'm thinking about it. I'm exhausted. I'm emotionally exhausted. I'm burnt out. Can't they let me just get on with my job? And look, maybe some of those lines might be throwaway lines. I'm sure some of us have muttered it at any given point in time. But if you're hearing that quite often in the workplace and you're sensing that actually these people are believing what they are saying, it's not just a throwaway line as it sometimes can be, then this is how people are communicating their feelings. So when you hear these type of repetitive comments, then it would be a really good idea to follow up with a conversation and check in how that person is feeling. And it might be something within their role or something within the workplace that could be an issue. And obviously that could be then the opportunity to try and help resolve that issue with them. Another great infographic. Thank you, Hacking HR. And this outlines some of the actions that can really, really destroy psychological safety in the workplace. So it's things like, you know, the traditional broken trust between managers, team members, etc. It's disrespect in the workplace. It's having a lack of accountability. It's just feedback being a checkbox. It's when people don't show up for one another and support. All these types of things can have an impact on individuals' health and well-being. And look, quite often when you look at these types of things, it's probably not a great culture if there's these sorts of behaviours being displayed. Now, let's take a quick look at the compliance aspect of psychosocial risks and hazards. So what are the repercussions for not managing psychosocial hazards and risks? Now, I do not want to scare you into submission by any stretch of the imagination, but it is valuable to know that there are repercussions if a business isn't complying with its obligations. So as many of you already know, under the Work Health and Safety Act, employers have a duty to ensure the health and safety of their workers, including their mental health. So if an employer fails to comply with their duty to manage psychosocial hazards, they may very well be liable for legal consequences. That could absolutely include civil penalties. So the Australian Safety and Compliance Authority can issue a civil penalty. And again, I don't want to scare you, but that can be a penalty of up to $10 million for serious breaches of the Workplace Health and Safety Act. It could lead to criminal charges. Employers can be charged with criminal offences under the Work Health and Safety Act, such as recklessly causing serious injury or death. And again, I don't want to scare you, but the maximum penalty for those offences is imprisonment of 20 years. Now, we are talking about exceptionally serious instances and breaches. Other options can be, or other repercussions can be things like workers' compensation claims. So an employee who suffers illness or injury as a result of psychosocial hazards in the workplace may be able to claim workers' compensation. And there may also be damages. So an employee who suffers an illness or injury because of poorly managed psychosocial hazards may also be able to sue their employer for damages. So I don't want you to take that only away from today. As I've mentioned before, that is really, really serious breaches of the Workplace Health and Safety Act. If you are implementing the things that we are talking about today, then obviously, hopefully, these things will not ever apply. In addition to legal and financial penalties, if you're not complying with the codes of practice, don't forget there's other things that you might incur repercussions with. So it could be the reputation of the business. It could harm the organisation's reputation. Poor management of psychosocial risks, people talk, and it absolutely can affect employee morale. And don't forget, employees and former employees may genuinely communicate their dissatisfaction about treatment in your workplace. And that can now, in this day and age, be on a public forum. So you don't want to lose that trust or that reputation. It may also have an impact on the workplace culture. A toxic or very unsafe work environment can lead to conflict. Absolutely, it can lead to low morale and a breakdown in team dynamics. And again, that is where you're going to increase the risk of a psychological injury or mental health issues such as anxiety and depression. Don't forget as well, if people are beginning to experience psychological injuries, then they may very well be off of work, and that might be for longer periods, especially in comparison to maybe physical injuries. And don't forget, there also might be operational impacts. So if you're not complying with codes of practice, you could have increased costs. That could be workers' compensation claims. It could be workers' compensation premiums. It could be legal fees to defend claims. It could be costs of implementing remedial actions or systems post-incident. So it could be that reactive action that does actually cost a lot of money rather than a proactive approach. Could be loss of productivity for the business. You might have increased absenteeism or presenteeism, which is obviously working whilst you're unwell. It could be lower employee morale and engagement. And again, that could reduce overall productivity with everyone. It could also have an operational impact in terms of turnover costs. So you might experience a higher turnover with the team if there's an unsafe work environment. We always practice what we preach, and we say, it's best to look after the people you have, because bringing someone else on board to recruit and to train costs far more money than it does to keep your existing staff happy and safe. So what can employers and employees do to work in a mentally healthy way alongside the risk management process? There are some proactive steps we can take to help protect everyone against psychosocial risks and hazards. And these can include things like taking care of our physical and mental health, learning stress management techniques, and obviously seeking support and having a good community around you to help you through those times. So how do we do it is the best question. And some of these things might apply. Some of them you might go, oh, I do that already. And some of them might be, oh my goodness, if I ever tried that, it wouldn't work. But here's some suggestions. And look, whatever can work for you can work for you. There's no hard and fast rule. But you could try and limit extra working hours. So don't book appointments outside of your, or meetings outside of your regular hours, and try and keep to your core hours. I think Carly will laugh when I say we always joke at, the people that book a meeting at 4 o'clock on a Friday. Nobody wants to be there. So try and limit your extra working hours. Schedule your meetings in your core working hours. Make sure you're taking regular breaks. This is really important. There's so many studies coming out now that, we have to get up and move. We can't be as sedentary as we thought we could be. We need fresh air. We need sunshine. We need to move around and be mobile. So make sure you're taking regular breaks. This one I love, try not to take work home, which again is very hard. And we've become a little bit accustomed to it, I think, since COVID and having I daren't say luxury of working from home, but, our patterns of work changed when we were allowed to work from home. So again, it's about putting the boundaries in place, putting a line in the sand and saying, no, I don't work past X time. And they can be some really simple things to do. Make sure you have your laptop in a different room to where you would spend your evenings, for example. Take holidays. Yay. You don't have to go anywhere. You can have a staycation, but it is really important to take time away from work. Setting realistic deadlines and delivering on them. If you can't deliver on them, you're going to communicate why. And you're going to be transparent with that communication so that nobody provides any extra pressure for you to deliver on realistically. Sometimes it's okay to say no. As we say, it's a complete sentence. Although sometimes saying just no might be construed as a little bit rude. But, if your capacity is too full, practice a response. And it could just be a case of, look, I'd really like to take that on, but I just don't have capacity this week. I'm happy to look at it next week for you. Would that work with your timeline? So it's just about being able to put your boundaries in and being able to verbalize those. And it's okay. It's okay to say, I can't do that at this time. Role model your behaviors. This is a key one, and this always trickles down from the top. Display behaviors you expect and accept, and do them yourself. Lead by example. Have a technology switch off. I'm not sure if anyone actually does that at all. I don't, I must confess. And it might not be applicable for people that are on call, for example. But again, there's so many apps on phones and things like that that you can be locked out of things so that you're not into that technology all the time. Look after your physical self. Look after your physical health and well-being. That can include things like your diet, exercise, it could be meditation, it could be yoga, it could be swimming, it could be anything, but obviously keeping your body moving is key to working in a mentally healthy way. We always, again, joke at work, I've got to go for a stupid mental health walk for my stupid mental health. And we're joking, but we really do know that that is really, really important. And that last one there, limit intake of alcohol and substances, again, can be quite hard, but, we know that substances and alcohol are not necessarily going to be beneficial to someone that might be experiencing mental struggles. Also working in a mentally healthy way, what can employers do? What can they offer? Supportive HR policies. Obviously, that can include things like health and wellbeing, EAP, mental health first aid, etc. EAP services, so employee assistance services, as I mentioned before. That essentially is a confidential service where the employer will pay for a certain amount of sessions with a psychologist for their employees. You might like to implement mental health first aiders within the workplace. It's amazing to have information and education sessions, training sessions, watching things like this webinar. We also do things like food for thought sessions with our clients that introduces people into topics that they might not also be aware of. You might like to have team retreats, very lucky if you do, or you might have social events. It might just even be a get-together every Friday night. But building that culture and that respect for the team is really, really working in a mentally healthy way and does provide a safe space, hopefully. You could implement things like additional mental health leave. That could be a type of leave that is on top of any of the required leave entitlements. And it could be a no questions asked day. You could provide additional annual leave if you wanted to, so similar to the mental health leave. And I love this one because, yes, you might be able to have pets in the workplace. It brings a smile to my face thinking about having my dog in the workplace. And I know we have a dog in the office. So, they bring a whole bundle of joy usually. But again, that needs to be supported with a policy and making sure that everyone's on board with having a dog in the workplace, or a cat or a parrot or whatever it happens to be. And for us to sort of summarize, I suppose, a mentally healthy workplace is a place where people feel supported. They feel happy to come to work and they feel comfortable talking about things like mental health and their well-being. A mentally healthy workplace is generally one where there's a positive workplace culture and an understanding that mental health is actually everyone's responsibility, which sort of falls under the OH&S obligations or the WHS obligations. It's also a place where stress and other risks to mental health are managed and supported. People feel safe and supported to talk about mental health or any issues that they might be arising from the workplace. And mental health support is tailored for individuals and the teams. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So that would be the backbone, I suppose, of a mentally healthy workplace, and a place where psychosocial risks and hazards are controlled and managed successfully. What are the benefits of creating a mentally healthy workplace? Many, many benefits to everyone involved in a workplace if there is a mentally healthy space. Obviously, it's a legal requirement, but the benefits include things like less absenteeism, less lost working days, hopefully increased productivity, greater job satisfaction, reduced staff turnover, and hopefully you can utilise your workplace culture to attract talented workers and retain those workers in the future. So there are a lot of benefits in addition to obviously meeting your legal obligations, but there are also a lot of benefits that that do come along with with managing these psychosocial risks and hazards. So a few key takeaways. Psychosocial hazard is any occupational hazard related to the way the work is designed, organised and managed, as well as economic and social contexts of work. Psychosocial risks and hazards are a legal obligation under workplace health and safety and have penalties for non-compliance. Risks should be identified, assessed, controlled, and reviewed on a regular basis. We would suggest, I mean, depending on how many you discover or you have, I would probably suggest at least once every 12 months. Obviously, if you have a lot, you might need to do them staggered across the year. And obviously, as I said before, you do need to prioritise the ones that have the high impact and high severity risks. And it also is, there are also many effective strategies that businesses and employees can implement to actively prevent psychosocial risks and hazards. And absolutely, these will vary from business to business and within different industries. So again, there's not one size fits all. It really does depend on your business, your workplace. So that's why it's really important to hopefully get a little gang together, get a little committee together, and sit down and look at all the aspects of the business and see if there are areas where you can identify risks and hazards, and go from there in that risk assessment process. Now, I have done very well whizzing through all of those tonight. I'll hand back to Carly and we'll see if there's any questions.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Frances. Please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. One of the things that came to mind while Frances was talking about how to identify those hazards in the workplace or any potential issues that I find works really well for us is one of the questions that we ask at our monthly one-to-ones is what's challenging you at the moment. Because that's not asking someone, can you please identify a hazard? It's saying what's actually making your job more challenging. And so someone might say, oh, it's like I've been dealing with this really difficult customer or client, or it might be someone saying, look, I just feel like I've just got so much on my plate right now. People, often when you ask someone directly a question like, yeah, what sort of psychosocial risks do you see? They'll go, no, I don't see any. But I find personally that just by asking that really simple question of what's challenging you at the moment, it allows you to see a pattern as well. It allows you to see, and the way we operate is often those challenges, they can be in work or outside of work. And we actually also have that question at our weekly meeting as well. Here's what's challenged, here's what I'm really proud of this week. Here's something that but also here's what's challenged me this week. And it can be work related or outside work. And again, people sharing them in our weekly meeting. We used to have a Monday morning meeting to set up the week. Now we have a Friday afternoon debrief because we find, partly because of what we do working in HR, that can be incredibly helpful for everybody to have that opportunity to talk about the things that might have been hard for them that week. And I actually think that helps us manage our psychosocial risk, particularly around burnout and things like that, because sometimes we're dealing with some, difficult issues and things like that, and it can be really helpful to have that support of your teammates. So, think about different ways that you might ask those questions, and that might be incredibly helpful. At this stage, it doesn't seem like we've got any questions that have been asked. I'll just double check that I'm in both of them. But no, we don't seem to have any questions at this point. So do we have another slide, Frances, or not? You do?
My little man saying
thank you. Okay. I was like, normally we have one that has our that might have our social media on it. So
we do, and I've omitted that on this one. Whoopsie! Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So for that purpose, look, I would say, for everyone, if you do have any questions around anything HR related, but psychosocial risks, we do have, if you are a client of Strawberry Seed, we do have checklists that you can use. We do have some information that might be incredibly helpful. We can come in and help you do a risk assessment if you find it might be quite difficult. There's options of doing surveys with your employees, both specifically on that or maybe just general surveys that, again, might be useful to help you identify those things. And I think we've all probably done these things in the past, but we maybe haven't been as focused on it. I mean, I certainly know in past lives as a HR manager, we did our walkarounds and we had a lot of checklists, particularly in industrial environments, about physical hazards and things like that. But I think what we're doing is by bringing it to the forefront so people are actively thinking about it. Some employers do that automatically, particularly in those industries like health and areas like that where their major risks generally are more the psychosocial risks. And just finally, I would also add that, it's important that they've got, like with any risk, there may be times where employees bring up these risks in a way that is to try and get them to get some sort of outcome that they want. And we hope that never, ever happens. But I think there is a big, identifying these risks and dealing with these risks. We are starting to see every now and then an employee sort of, I guess what I'm saying is your employees are out there reading about this and they're seeing about this. So I think that you're better off actually going on the journey with them, having these conversations with them, because we are occasionally seeing an employee who's maybe not getting their way, starting to throw these terms around, and they're becoming quite familiar with them. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think there is a very big difference to something that's causing a workplace, to cause a workplace injury. It does need to not just be, hey, I was slightly annoyed by that, or there was a slight conflict. It is a little bit more than that. But I think getting ahead of it, having those conversations with your employees, being proactive about it, and sort of regularly checking in, as you probably, as good employees do anyway, can be really helpful. And that element of making sure that your supervisors and managers are trained. I think some of the issues we do see come up is, maybe the business owner or the senior leadership team are right across it, but the supervisory staff, someone goes to them with an issue and they tell them to suck it up, or, they don't react well. So it's also making sure that you have a consistent message across all levels of leadership. But I want to thank Frances for putting this together today. As always, she's done an amazing job. And this is our last one for 2024, because there is literally 4.5 weeks left until we shut down for Christmas. And that's a little scary. I will say that we're already looking at all our topics for next year. I can confirm that our first topic in January will be on AI in the workplace, because we are starting to have lots of conversations in that area. So we'll kick off the year with that. There's going to be, we're potentially looking at some around neurodiversity and other things, getting into deep diving a little bit more on sexual harassment. But if there's any particular topics that you'd love us to cover, we are more than happy to put one of these together. And also we have a big back catalogue on our YouTube channel. Some of them are also on our website under advice videos as well. So thank you so much to those that attended, and also thank you to those that are watching this as a recording later on. And thank you so much, Frances.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Have a great night. Thank you.